When it comes to mounting scopes, many people overcomplicate the process. I want to encourage you guys to take a step back. Let's simplify it, because at the end of the day, we're taking an optic, we're squaring it up with our rifle, we are leveling it off and applying a tool that allows us to verify that we are level. And it is a very, very easy process when you boil down the steps. So today, I'm going to teach you how to mount your rifle scope. We're going to be using my Bergara B14 HMR 300 Winchester Magnum and the Vortex Razor 4.5 to 22 scope with tally base, tally rings to just talk you guys through the setup of a rifle scope. It's not as complicated as you think. I think oftentimes people try to make this process way more difficult, even inadvertently, than it has to be. So before you begin, you're going to need to make sure your gun's unloaded, obviously. You're going to want your user manual for your scope, because inside of that, it's going to give you the inch-pound torque specs for not only the scope, but also the rings. If it doesn't have it in your scope user manual, the rings that you purchased should come with information on the torque spec for the base on the Picatinny rail. Please keep in mind, when we're talking about torquing these things down, we are not talking about foot-pounds. I promise that's a great way to ruin a scope if you use foot-pounds instead of inch-pounds. As far as tools, what you saw me doing in this video, which you will see me doing in this video, I have a bipod on the gun, a bag under the stock. You could use a bag on the front as well, but I like a bipod because I can tighten it down and I can level up the gun. On the rifle, I like to have some sort of a bubble level. So this tally base, it is a 20 MOA canted base on my Bergara, has a built-in bubble level. You can also purchase bubble levels that just kind of clip onto the Picatinny rail, and that allows me to level the gun, then focus on leveling the scope. And then I know if I have the gun level, the scope is always level as well when I'm out in the field shooting long distances. One thing that I do want to note for you, that is not necessarily critical. There are people that will put the scope at an intentional cant to match their eye level for when they're comfortable behind the rifle. That's perfectly acceptable. The key here, guys, is we are setting the rifle up here in our shop or in your house or wherever you're setting it up to replicate exactly how you're gonna shoot in the field. So if you prefer a slight cant to your optic, the key is gonna be that your level on your optic matches your optic, and that when you're behind the gun, you are perfectly replicating exactly the form, the fit, and the function of the rifle that you were when you set up the scope. Because as we get out deep at very long distances, that's where those things start to really matter. Aside from that, guys, the only other thing you're gonna need is that inch-pound torque wrench. I used to set up rifle scopes without it. I highly recommend you get one. They're very inexpensive. It's gonna save you a lot of guesswork. You're not gonna ruin your scope if you follow those torque specs. If you just go by hand, you could eventually clamp down too much on the tube, and what can happen is you can actually ruin the scope. You can put too much pressure on all of the little gears and stuff inside the scope, whether it's your zoom or your turrets for the elevation. That can damage your scope if you're too aggressive. So let's talk through the process here of mounting your rifle optic. As I said, the first thing that is the most important thing is that your magazine is empty, your action is open so that you're safe and that you don't accidentally discharge the firearm, and keep it pointed in a safe direction to just eliminate the chance of hurting anybody or yourself or your property. That is a rule that you have to follow. The next thing that we're gonna do is take the rings out of the package, and we're gonna position the rings on the Picatinny rail in such a way that it allows us to put the scope and do what I'm gonna call a rough adjustment. So what I do is I typically put the scope bases on, I lightly tighten them, I don't torque them down fully. I put them in the position I think is going to be best, then I set the rifle optic down into those rings, and I'm gonna try to center the rifle's optic up inside of those rings. Depending on your optic, the objective diameters and the diameter of the tube and where the turrets are at, that's going to affect how much front and back movement you're going to have, and also cantilever mounts can limit that adjustability. We're gonna call that the rough adjustment, basically figuring out where the rings can sit on the Picatinny and then centering the scope up inside of that. The next thing that I'm gonna look for is positioning that scope roughly where I feel like it's going to give me the proper eye relief. And keep in mind, guys, before I did any of this, I made sure that the length of pull on my stock is in the proper position. That's a video for another day, but you want the length of pull to be proper so that you have the right eye box, the right eye relief, and you can get behind the scope on all of the magnification levels. So after that scope is laid down in the rings, I'm gonna start playing with that fine adjustment. And at this point, I don't care about whether or not the scope is level. I just wanna make sure that I get the scope roughly where my eyes need it to be able to get that proper eye relief. And then after I get that, you're gonna see me lightly tighten down the caps. And I need to do that so that there's a little bit of tension on the tube. I'm not torquing it down yet, but then I'm gonna do a gentle front and back movement of that optic until I get that proper eye relief. And the key here, guys, is you wanna start off on that low power, but where it really starts to matter and where that eye relief gets very finicky is at the higher powers. So then you'll see me switching back and forth between the 4.5 power. I might go up to 10, 12, 15. I want my eye behind that optic as I adjust that all the way around to that maximum zoom level. And I wanna make sure that I don't have to pull my head front or back to maintain that proper eye box. And once that's all dialed in, then I'm gonna lightly snug up all of the rings so that the scope can't fall out, it can't fall off of the gun and get damaged. So what I personally use in our office, we have a really big calendar on the wall, and I hung the calendar myself. It is plumb and true, not only horizontally, but vertically. And because there's grids, that gives me something to reference in the scope as I'm leveling it. So at this point, I've got my scope lightly snugged up in those rings. And now my objective is to level the rifle, and I use the bubble level on the back of my Picatinny rail, or like I said, you can use those clamp on bubble levels, and I'm gonna make sure the gun is level because that's what I like to do. And then I'm going to look at the calendar, the grid, horizontal and vertical, and I'm gonna rotate that scope until everything is perfectly in line with those grids. And at that point, I can start tightening down the rings. And the key here, guys, is you go slow when you're tightening down the rings. Do not just tighten down one screw on one side all the way and then go to the other. I go in very small increments back and forth in a cross pattern. So if I do the one on my left here closest to me, I'm gonna start on the one on the right furthest from me, and I'm gonna look visually with my eyes that the gap of the rings on the scope is equal. And that's important so that we're clamping equally down on the scope. Different scopes have different tolerances and different rings have different tolerances. So I wanna make sure that as I'm tightening it down, there's an equal clamp load on those rings. And once that occurs, I can torque these down. Now this particular scope recommends 18 inch-pounds for the torque spec, so I set my torque wrench to 18 inch-pounds. I already have them in a cross pattern snugged up. I know everything is level regarding the gap in the rings between the bottom half and the upper half. And I'm gonna torque everything down to 18 inch-pounds. And then after that step is done, I will loosen up the rings on the bottom as well. And I'm gonna take the scope and push it forward so that it is up against the front edge of the Picatinny section. Really high quality bases, really high quality rings are gonna have very little gap. They're gonna have very little movement in the Picatinny. If you have a less expensive rifle or less expensive rings, you may actually be able to rock that scope inside the gaps on the Picatinny. And under recoil, if you think about this, your gun is going backwards and pushing into you. That scope wants to go forward, or at least stay in place, I should say. Objects at rest stay at rest. Objects in motions like to stay in motion unless they're acted upon by an equal or opposite force. So what happens is you can actually throw off your zero and cause some zeroing issues if the scope is not pushed up against the front of the Picatinny rail section. And after I know fully that the scope is level, I've double and triple checked it, everything's torqued down, and I've double checked that level up against the grid after torquing it down, then I can move on to the scope bases. And different manufacturers have different specifications. So again, inside of your rings, it should have a specification. If they don't, your rifle should have a specification. It's going to be a higher torque spec typically than the rings itself because that Picatinny rail is not fragile. So after all of that is done and I've torqued down the base, I'm going to once again get behind the gun. I'm going to verify that the scope is level on that grid when the rifle is level. That confirms that the rifle and scope are in the same plane for me, for my tastes. And then the last step is I'm gonna put a bubble level over the left side of the gun, and I do that for a specific reason. I shoot my rifles both eyes open. What I'm able to do is see that bubble level really quickly with my left eye in sort of my peripheral vision, and I can make sure that that's level when I'm squeezing off a shot deep down range. And when that's all leveled up and I know the gun's level and the scope is level on that grid, I will torque that thing down as well to 18 inch-pounds. And I know that was a lot to throw at you guys, but it is a very simple process. It is not complicated. Make sure you have the right tools, make sure you follow your user manual, make sure your gun's empty and you're safe. And the last test of this entire setup for me is to get into different shooting positions and make sure in the field that the scope setup that I chose in my shop or my office or my house lines up perfectly with what I need in the field. And if it does, you guys are good to go. You can zero your rifle and then go learn some valuable skills. So if you found that helpful, I wanna know down in the comments section, leave us a comment, let us know what other topics you want us to cover. I hope that this helps you become a more well-rounded citizen. And as always, guys, we appreciate you. Like, subscribe, share, and check out our website for the best steel targets, in my opinion, on the planet. Supporting us on our website by buying our products helps us do videos like this. Huge shout out to Bergara for sending out the rifle and for Vortex Optics for sending the scope. See y'all in the next one.